Welcome to another 21 Hats Dashboard, brought to you by Grasshopper Bank. I'm your host, Lauren Feldman, and I'm here with Julia Beardwood, who is founder and, until recently, CEO of Beardwood, a New York City-based branding agency. Welcome to the podcast, Julia.
Thanks very much for inviting me on.
Great to have you here. Our primary focus is going to be how you managed your exit, Julia, but give us some of the background. How did you come to start your branding agency?
I've always worked in branding and marketing since the beginning of my career, which I started working for P&G as an assistant brand manager in the UK. I moved to New York. I went to work in advertising for 10 years. Then I moved into branding and design by working with a global branding agency called Landor. And I left Landor in 2004, and I decided it was time for me to do the entrepreneurial thing, and I started Beardwood. And basically, we're a branding agency that works with large brands, primarily national and global brands, to help them accelerate their brand growth, extend their brand, introduce new brands. So we work across categories, but basically everything's focused on branding.
What drove you to start your own business? It sounds like your career was, by all measures, going quite well. You could have continued along the same path. What changed?
I was working for, as I said, a large branding agency that actually got acquired by and this is relevant to my exit story, but it got acquired by WPP, which is one of the big international conglomerates. And that happened in 2001. And to be honest, it was an absolutely miserable experience. I did not like working for a great big global holding company. And so I wasn't very happy at work. My children were 10 and 14 at the time, and I thought it would be good to spend more time with them before they left for college. So I kind of stopped that big job, came home, started working as a consultant and a freelance brand strategist. And I found that work just very naturally grew into a business where I needed to employ other people. That I would do a piece of brand strategy work, and the client would say to me, all right, Julia, we need to execute this. We need a name, a logo, a package, a website. Can you help me do that? And I'm naturally a yes person. And so I started by hiring freelance teams and doing that work. So the business kind of grew beyond me into these freelance teams. And then it really started to snowball. And so I hired my first employee in 2006. And then I found that clients said, oh, you've got people now. And so they said, we'll give you some more work. So I went from kind of 0 to 6 or 7 people in that first year of having employees. So that's kind of how it all came about.
Wow, that's really quick. You started as a one-person shop, a consultant basically, and had 6 or 7 employees within a year?
It was actually, I did that freelance consulting thing / virtual teams for about a year and a half. And then, as I said, I hired my first employee in February of 2006. And that really caused the business to escalate, to actually have, all of a sudden I looked more legitimate, I think, to my clients, to actually have an employee versus just turning up solo. And so that's what caused the business to escalate in 2006, 2007.
So one of the things I really appreciate about your story and would love to share is that you kind of laid the groundwork for your exit by setting up an interesting compensation plan early on. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, and that very much relates to that first employee that I'm talking about, who was a senior designer when she joined me in February of 2006. And our revenues doubled the year that she joined me. So I think I'd been doing about 400,000 before she joined. We did 800,000 that year, and then we did 1.6 million the following year. So her impact on the business was immense. And I wanted to recognize and reward her for that impact. And so I turned to an advisor I call him my financial fairy godfather. And he said to me, I have a plan for you. He called it a partnership profit sharing plan. He had used it successfully at his own firm. And the plan, he said, don't try giving this person equity in the business. It's not going to be a good thing for her. It's not going to be a good thing for you. He said, but you want to give her a sense of ownership without parting with your equity. And so the plan consists of a partner title, which gives the recognition from the external world. You can go tell your mom about it, and your friends say, "Wow, you're a partner." And she was in her late 20s at the time, so that was a big deal. A say in running the business and which clients we worked with, which clients we didn't work with, how we hired and fired, and that kind of thing. So therefore a sense of ownership, and then a compensation that went above and beyond. She was already getting a base salary, a bonus based on the performance of the business, and also good benefits. So on top of that, she was going to be given a partnership profit share. So I gave her a percentage of the profits. That's after my salary was paid and any performance bonus I'd earned. So really true profits. So she would receive a chunk of those profits, but it was recorded or afforded by making that payable 2 years after the year it had been earned. So she would have to, if it was 2006, say, she would receive the profit sharing incentive for that year in December of 2008. So essentially 24 months after the end of the year.
Assuming she was still there.
Assuming she was still there. And obviously that's kind of a golden handcuffs move. So it's an incentive to, if you've got $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 waiting on top of your salary and bonus, then unless you're really unhappy, it's easier to just stick with it. And obviously, if you're earning it each year, then it's not just one bonus, it's 2 years of bonus that you've got to look forward to in the future. And the other components that my financial advisor wrote into this is that the bonus would only be payable if the business was growing and profitable. So if the business did dip, we have kind of an unpredictable business model because our work is all project-based, so it's hard to predict exactly what we're going to get from year to year. But if the revenues did dip below the average of the prior 2 years, then the profit sharing would not be paid out. It would basically go to zero. There would be no payout. And in the course of the 20 years that we had this in practice, that did happen in a couple of years, but it didn't happen very often. And obviously, in order to earn the profit sharing, she needed to be present in the business for the year, and she needed to have good performance reviews during the course of the year. But that was basically the format that we used.
And did you find that this plan worked the way you intended initially? Did it make her happy? Did it motivate her? Did it work for the business as a whole?
Damn right it did. That's why I wanted to come on your podcast and tell people about it, because I think it's such an incredibly useful model. It did motivate her. It very much made her feel and act like an owner of the business. And another piece that I forgot to mention, and the business continued to grow very nicely over the course of the years. Another piece that I forgot to mention is that if we set a value on the business at that time, and if we ever were to sell the business, then she would get that percentage of the business above. If we sold it for, say, we sold it for 10 million, and we set that initial value at 2 million, then she would have got 10% of the 8 million difference there. I'm not using the correct percentages, but that's kind of what. So there was kind of an incentive for her to help grow the business in case we ever sold it. And also, if we were ever to invite in another partner, then we would adjust the percentages for her.
Did you end up doing this with other employees as well?
Yes, we did. Later, invite in another partner, and he had also worked with Sarah and I prior to Beardwood, so we were all pretty familiar with each other. No one joined as a partner. You had to come in and demonstrate that you would have an impact on the business. That was kind of the criteria for earning partnership. So our second person came in. He worked in the business a couple of years, and Sarah and I decided to give him this partnership profit sharing status as well as the title. And so then her percentage was reduced a little bit, and he came in with a lower percentage than her because he was a newer partner, and that seemed fair that she'd had such a big impact early on that she deserved a slightly bigger percentage. But yes, so then there were two partners, and that again is important to the exit story as well. Two partners plus me.
Well, that's exactly where I wanted to go next, because I'm eager to hear whether you actually thought this out in advance or not. But what you did was create a couple of key employees that not only were motivated and acting like owners, but also accumulated some wealth, which gave them the ability to participate in an acquisition years later. Was that part of the plan?
I was not that much of a genius. Although, again, back to my financial advisor, he did build in that component about a sale down the road. So there was always that kind of thinking that there was possibly some kind of exit. But I didn't really think through the impact of paying, giving two people. They were, she started this in her 20s, and he was probably in his early 40s when we started this program. But really paying them significant amounts of money that allowed them to, they each managed to buy their primary apartments, and then they each managed to buy a weekend cottage. So they were doing pretty well on the basis of getting these partnership payouts.
Can you give us a sense of how big the business got?
The business got to about $6 million in revenues.
And how many total employees?
At its peak, around 25. And we also work with a lot of, in the creative business, you tend to work with a lot of freelancers on top of your core group, getting back to that project-based work. So if we had 25 employees, we probably had about another 25 freelancers on top of that.
Wow. So when did you start thinking about an exit?
I think a couple of things happened. One was an illness. Whenever you get a major medical event, that tends to start you thinking about your mortality. And that happened to me in 2015 when I was diagnosed with lymphoma. And when your doctor says, don't go home and Google this, you know that it's not a good situation.
Sorry to hear that.
So that was really the first time, so 2015. And
that was 11 years ago. You're doing well?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. Yes, it has been surprisingly good compared to what I was told at the time. And I had a reasonably easy chemo process, and the lymphoma has gone back into remission. But it certainly was a moment when I thought to myself, whoa, what's going to happen if I'm not here?
Sure.
What's going to happen? My husband certainly didn't want to be inheriting a branding business. That would not be doing him any good. So certainly that got me starting to think about it. And maybe I took a little longer than I should, but I got together with my partners in January of 2020, and we had an offsite, and I said to them, I'm flying this plane, and I need to figure out a way that I can get off this plane, because I can't be flying this plane for a lot longer. So that was kind of really where I introduced the the conversation about, well, what are we going to do?
You spent some time, I think you told me you spent about 5 years investigating options. What options did you consider?
Yeah, it's certainly when you're thinking as a business owner, when you're thinking about an exit, you do want to consider all of the options and seek out people who can give you good advice. And so I'd certainly been looking into this before 2020. But that was really the beginning of 2020. I'd kind of ESOPs and employee ownership always appealed to me as an idea. I am egalitarian in that way, and having a great workplace, and having worked in an unpleasant workplace, I kind of knew what I liked and what I didn't like about workplaces. So that was of interest. Um, I'm just trying to, and ESOPs always seemed to be quite complicated. I'd spent quite a lot of time listening to podcasts and attending webinars of that and speaking to friends who'd gone through that. So that seemed interesting, but kind of complicated.
Did you think your business was large enough to support an ESOP?
I actually think that it probably wasn't. I think that what I learned is around about 5 million. That is the kind of cutoff point for an ESOP. So it probably wasn't quite as big as it needed to be to do that. And then I felt like as I got into it, it seemed like it was potentially landing the company with a lot of debt. And that seemed a bit scary. And so what happened in 2020, as we discussed the options, the consultant that we were working with recommended that we get a valuation of the company. And so that's something that you can do. It can often be very expensive to get a valuation, but there was a consultant who specialized in our business who was able to do a kind of down and dirty valuation for $5,000. And so we did that in the spring of 2020, and that was useful because it was the first time that I had any sense as to what the company might be worth.
The spring of 2020, it seems to me something else happened then. Wasn't there a pandemic or something?
Yeah.
Did that have an impact on your business?
It actually didn't in that year.
Interesting.
Or if any, it probably did have a good impact because we put in for one of those payroll loans that the government was
PPP loan.
A PPP loan. And so because most of our clients are large multinational companies, they didn't really get affected. They're thinking about business 3-4 years into the future. And so they were not negatively affected. Some of them were actually positively affected. If you can imagine, any food brand at that moment went through the roof. Soap brands were doing very well. So the business wasn't negatively affected by the pandemic. And as I said, we kind of got a boost with that PPP loan, which we put into, but we did what we were supposed to do with it. We invested it in people. So we actually did pretty well in 2020, but obviously the team was very, shaken by that experience. And also one of the two partners that I've spoken about lost her father as a result of the pandemic. He was one of the early victims of the pandemic. And so that did make it difficult to have, the whole pandemic did make it difficult to progress conversations about what we were going to do with the business because, as she said to me, there's a global pandemic going on. I can't talk about this right now.
Did you look into the option of just finding a strategic buyer? It seems like the kind of business where you would have had a lot of interested suitors if you did choose to go that route.
We never went out looking for a buyer, but we did have some buyers come to us and ask whether or not we were interested in the sale. So we had a few of those over the years. And it was always, no, I'm not really quite ready for it. Doesn't feel like the right time. But then we did, as I said, 2020 kind of got taken up with the pandemic. So the whole exit question got put on hold. And then in 2021, the beginning of 2021, we did have one of the large global conglomerates come to us and say they were interested in buying us to merge into their company in New York, that we had expertise that they wanted. So I said to Ryan and Sarah, I really don't want to work for a large conglomerate, but what do you want to do? Because this has really got to be your input and choice going forward. And they said, let's go through the motions and see what happens. And so we spent most of 2021 talking to this large conglomerate and meeting with them, seeing if there was a good chemistry fit, delving into our business, sharing all the financials. And we got to a place at the end of 2021, so this took close to a year, this conversation, where we mutually decided that it was not a good fit. And that really came from two things. From their side, they said that we were not as profitable as they would want us to be in order to make an acquisition. And from our side, they required me to work for them for 5 years in order to make this deal happen.
Wow.
There was absolutely no way I was going to be working for an international conglomerate for the next 5 years at this stage in my career. Perhaps I could have done that when I was 40, but I was not going to be doing that when I was 58.
Interesting. So it broke off at that point. What was your thinking then? What options were still on the table?
So my goal was we'd been talking to Sarah and Ryan, my two partners, about them taking over the business. Initially, one of them was much keener than the other. But after going through this whole conversation, they had got to a point where they did feel that they were both interested if we could work out the actual details of the transaction. So that's when we started to move. So this is 2022. We moved into deal-making mode and kind of had, again, people help us with outlining the how this might work, what the numbers might be. And we did reach a deal. Again, these things take a long time. Towards the end of 2022, and we had some lawyers involved in drafting up an agreement. So that was kind of where we had the framework for a deal. Unfortunately, in 2023, for a reason that affected many agencies like us, the business just dropped like a stone. In early 2023, we were finding clients were freezing work all over the place so that those projects weren't coming in. And when you have a staff of 25 people, your cash flow goes down really, really quickly. And as I thought about flying my plane, I thought that our plane might be coming in for a crash landing. I kind of had a moment, well, if that's going to be how it ends, then so be it. You know, it's if that's I wasn't happy about it, but if that's what was going to happen, it felt kind of out of our hands. We laid off a number of people, 10 people out of our 25. So it was a really miserable experience.
You had said that when the deal with the conglomerate broke off, it was mutual, and on their end, their thinking was that you weren't profitable enough. Had you been able to address that issue in any way before the business turned down?
The year that 2022, so the year after they said we weren't profitable enough, was our best year ever. The business was booming. So things just went very, very well. It's an unpredictable thing. And I think that acquirers want your revenue to be as predictable as it possibly can be. They don't want to be taking any risk. Yet fundamentally, the business that we're in does have a risk component to it. And, you know, of our years, the vast majority of them have been successful and profitable. So I think that it was probably 2021 was not a great year. 2022 was a fantastic year. 2023 was another challenging year. So it's kind of and obviously the business is going to be priced according to that risk that the profits could be over $1 million in one year and it could be $200,000 the next year. We've never had an unprofitable year.
So what happened after the difficult year when you had to lay people off? How quickly did you recover?
We actually started to recover in the middle of 2022. So all of a sudden the plane's going nose down and then the nose comes up and we're gliding again, and having sort of reduced our cost base, we were doing pretty well and things stabilized. So it was kind of the dive was so sudden and unexpected that was a shocker. But then also kind of the recovery also felt like a little bit of a shocker. But it certainly made me feel like I really did not want to be doing this much longer. So it kind of accelerated my desire for an exit because I really did not want to be laying people off. And yet for the other two partners, they felt immense pride and accomplishment at that turnaround, that things had stabilized, and they were very proud of themselves. They were very proud of the people that they'd hired to kind of support them. And so I think that it was perhaps it made me feel a bit more like, get me out of here. And it made them feel more like, we're in charge here. We can do this. So I think that was actually a kind of a mind shift thing that really helped.
So where did you turn in terms of thinking about the exit at that point? Were you looking for another acquirer, or were you thinking about selling to your key employees?
I was definitely keen to sell to the key employees. In our business, creative businesses don't tend to do very well when they're acquired by outside parties, mainly because the outside party may have a different culture. So the culture often fades quickly, but mainly because the goal of the outside acquirer is to make the company more profitable. And the way that you do that is you make people's lives miserable.
That's the private equity approach.
Yeah, exactly. And we're a people business, so you have people work harder, you give them less support. So I really was keen to try and maintain the culture and the treatment of people that we had developed over the years. So that very much meant Sarah and Ryan would be the right people if they were interested in taking it over and if we could reach a financial deal. And I would say that something else happened that was very useful to making the deal happen. One was that we had hired, I think in 2021, a director of finance and operations. And so he was almost like our translator that we didn't need, that he was our go-between. He could talk to all three parties, and he realized why you need a negotiator. It's better just to have somebody else saying, what do you want? What do you want? And then we also had an outside tax accountant who was doing all of our business reporting and also at the personal taxes for all three partners. So she understood everybody's financial situation. And she was really the person who ended up proposing exactly how this would work. So that was seriously useful to have those two people involved in the proposing and negotiation.
That's interesting. So it wasn't a traditional negotiation between seller and buyer. It was more of a group effort with an expert making suggestions?
Yes.
Did that go smoothly?
Yes, it was amazing. It was, and again, to have these trusted experts, both our internal person and our external person, who were really clarifying everybody's questions about the deal, laying it out in a way that they thought were fair to all parties was, it felt very collaborative, which is kind of us.
Julia, it seems to me that one theme here is that at almost every turn, you've found really good advisors, people who pointed you in the right direction, starting with your fairy godfather back when you were first building the business. How did you find these people?
They tend to recommend each other. So I think that the first one I found through a business friend who worked, so the financial fairy godfather, he came at the recommendation of a friend I'd known through the business. So he was the CFO at this friend's company, and he's advised me for years, and he has never charged me a dime in those years.
Wow.
A reminder that I need to take him out to lunch. And then the consultant we'd worked with at the beginning of 2020, when I was talking about financial valuation, said, I don't do that, but I recommend this person. And so we went to him. The tax accountant we got through somebody that we were consulting with on our payments software, and she said, I'm not that kind of financial accountant, but I recommend this person. So yeah, it's all come from word of mouth recommendations.
So can you tell us the highlights of the deal that you eventually cut? And in particular, did your key employees have to pony up a bunch of money?
That was what I had heard from other friends who had acquired agencies, is that they had been put in very difficult financial situations where they had to kind of put their house up and max out their credit cards and ask friends for money. And again, these are two partners who I have long-term relationships with. We call it kind of a three-way marriage that sometimes somehow manages to work. So I didn't want to do that to them. The components of the plan was that they would put together a down payment that would come from initially those 2 years of the profit sharing plan that I had yet to pay. So there were 2 years of pots of money that was still to be paid. And so that became the down payment for the company. It was several $100,000. And then the second component of the plan was that I was able to remove my cash. I had a lot of cash sitting in the business, about $1 million. And so I was able to take that cash out, and I would give them an operating loan. It was initially $250,000 for them to kind of start to get money into the business. So that was already a pretty sizable chunk of money.
So just to be clear, that loan was not to pay you for the business. That loan was to operate the business after your exit.
Yes, because I was taking cash out of the business. They needed to have money to meet payroll. So that was a loan, an operating loan. And so aside from that initial deposit, the down payment that came from canceling the 2 years of profit sharing and the cash I could take out of the business, there was then a loan, which was the payment price for the business. And that is a loan that I extended to them, that we have an agreement that that money will be paid out over the course of 7 years. And so we're now in about year 2.5 of that 7-year plan. So that's really a an owner financed buyout.
Were you comfortable with that?
Yes, I was comfortable with it. And obviously there is some risk involved. As I've said, it's an unpredictable business and who knows what's going to happen.
And it might be hard for you to go after these people the way you would if you didn't know them and didn't have a relationship with them.
Yes, I think it would be very unlikely that I would go after them. And in part, that's because I know and admire them. and know that they would do anything they could possibly do to make the business successful. So I think that that yes, there was definitely a risk to this. There is a risk to this continued, and we also agreed that I would remain in the business at a reduced role. So I initially, so then they pay me for my time to support them in really marketing and business development. So I didn't go anywhere. And now again, we're in 2.5 years of that relationship that also seems to be working pretty well. And initially I went down to 3 days a week, and I'm now down to 1.5 days a week supporting them.
And what is that like, going from being the boss to definitely not being the boss? Has that been comfortable?
Mostly, yes. I think that I was, as I mentioned, in that difficult year of 2023, I was so keen to stop doing this that my desire to stop doing this or stop being the boss was pretty high. So I was, I have been working now. This is the 40th year that I will have been working. So I was kind of like, yep, I'm ready for that. I don't need, my ego doesn't need this anymore. And I was also keen to do other things, particularly travel, spend more time outside and not looking at a computer. So I think that my desire to not be the boss was very high. And also I take pleasure in seeing the people that I have nurtured and mentored take over that role and do well. Do I agree with everything that they do? No.
And what happens then?
Can I keep my mouth shut? Yes.
That must be challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have a phrase. I don't know if this is feedback is love. That if there's something I feel really strongly about, I'll send them a note or I'll set up a call. But mostly, I feel like they're doing the right thing, and sometimes they need to be able to make their own mistakes.
A little bit like parenting.
Mm-hmm. A lot like that.
It's almost a cliche that it's so common for business owners who exit to wake up one morning and not know what to do, not know who they are, not know how to introduce themselves at a cocktail party or something like that. Have you had an adjustment period with those kinds of issues?
Definitely. It's so easy to say, well, I founded this company, but then I sold it. So that does get to be a bit awkward. What I do find good about it is actually having a little bit of distance from the company. I find it really easy to brag about the company because it's kind of like, it's not me anymore, it's them. And so that I take pride in. And yeah, I am establishing my new post-Beardwood identity, and that involves quite a lot of mentoring, which is a nice experience. I'm mentoring some other small business owners and traveling and playing a lot of pickleball.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Julia, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it will resonate with a lot of people. You obviously did a lot of things right. So thank you for taking the time and for being so open with the specifics.
Thanks for having me on.
Julia Beardwood is founder of Beardwood, a New York City-based branding agency. And I just really want to thank you for taking the time. And special thanks to our sponsor, Grasshopper Bank. Thanks for listening, everybody.